Hi everyone, it's Melissa, and today I will be sharing books that I read for Historathon. So this was a readathon hosted in February where you read historical fiction, and it was hosted by Amanda from The Curly Reader and Sarah from Sarah's Nightstand. I'll link their channels below. It had prompts, and I love a good prompt. The prompts were historical fiction with a male on the cover, one set before 1900, one with dual timelines, one not set in the US or Europe, one featuring a child character, one in a period of time or surrounding an event that you're unfamiliar with, one featuring, not featuring, but I think mentioning like a real historical figure, and a book with a location in the title. So I was able to hit all these prompts in just 4 books. I only really average about 1 book a week, so I tried to lump as many prompts onto a book as possible. So the first book I read was Next Year in Havana by Chanel Cleaton. So this book is about 2 family members, Marisol and her grandmother Elisa. So the dual timelines are Marisol in current day, and I think this book is set in like 2017 or something, whenever Fidel Castro had died. So the borders are opening up a little bit with Cuba. You can actually visit there again in certain situations. And in 2017, Marisol's grandmother Elisa has just passed away, and her final wish was to have her ashes spread in Cuba, because she has not been able to return there since she was like 18 years old, or whenever her family had to flee because of the revolution. So it follows that timeline of Marisol going to Cuba for the first time to try to find a location that was meaningful to her grandmother to spread her ashes. And while she's there, she is given this box of letters from her grandmother's childhood friend, and they're love letters, and she's uncovering all these family secrets. And so that's really her storyline. And then the other timeline is her grandmother Elisa, when she's a teenager going into early adulthood, right before, like during the revolution, essentially. So the 2 stories kind of have this common thread of like forbidden love. So when Marisol goes to Cuba, she starts having feelings for a man who's married. So she's not supposed to have feelings for him. And then in the other timeline, in Elisa, her grandmother's timeline, she meets a man who it turns out is a revolutionary. And this is a big problem because Elisa is from a wealthy family. Her father like owns a sugarcane, like they have like a sugarcane empire, and so they benefit from the regime, and her father is friends with the president, and so dating a revolutionary is not a good thing. So that's kind of the plot of the book, and overall I enjoyed it. The things I liked about it the most, this is going to sound weird, but it taught me a lot about Cuban history, but not in a dull way. It incorporated into the story quite well, but about like the pre-revolution, like I didn't really know anything about the regime before Fidel Castro took over, and so I got to learn a little bit more about that, what life was like for Cubans at the time, about the revolution, like it building and how that happened, and then life after. It was just all very fascinating and done in a really a great way. And I loved the story of Elisa meeting this like revolutionary, and like that was really interesting in how she was going to handle that. So I'll say that the problems I had with the book, the first one is, it probably wouldn't be a problem for everyone. I think this is just my own personal taste. I think I just don't like romance very much. And the romance, especially like with Marisol, I found it a bit cringy, like when there are descriptions of, this is in no way a steamy book, but just, this man that she's falling in love with, like, oh, she saw him and like her arms tingled. I don't know. I found that kind of stuff very cringy. Sorry if my camera shifted. My phone fell. Um, so yeah, so one little quibble was the romance, but I think I just don't really care for romance. My main problem with this book was I was way, way, way more engaged with Elisa's story, with her timeline, than I was with Marisol's. I found um, Elisa's, like, her finding out more about, her privilege um, and how, her family was benefiting from this regime and off the labor of other people to have this like sugarcane empire and all this stuff. I found that interesting. Marisol's story, like, I didn't really care about her falling in love with this married guy. Like, I didn't care about her as a character, and I found her timeline, like, I was just like, okay, can we get back to Elisa now? Every time we were on a chapter about Marisol, the only time I really found her um, story engaging was when she was finding out the family secrets, and whenever it revolved more around Elisa, I guess was what I'm trying to say. Um, so yeah, so the book was good. I enjoyed reading it, but I really was bored of Marisol and just wanted to learn more about Elisa. The next book I'm going to talk about is Fruit of the Drunken Tree by, just a second, the author's name is Ingrid Rojas Contreras. So it's set in the 1980s in Colombia. It shifts between two perspectives. So we have Chula, who is like 7 or 8, I think, when the story starts, and it revolves around her family, who are a bit wealthier, and they live in kind of like this gated community in Bogota. Um, and the other main narrator is Patrona, a girl of 13 or 14, so a little bit of a coming of age story for her, but she lives basically in the slums, and she comes to work as a maid for Chula's family. And unlike Next Year in Havana, I was equally riveted by both stories in this book. Um, so it's about Chula, learning about what's happening in her city, or as much as she can learn. That's one thing I actually really liked about the story is she used the child narrator really cleverly, I found, where you're, she's hearing stuff on the news, or her parents are talking about things, or she's witnessing things firsthand. And that's how the information about what's going on is filtered to you. So you don't really get the whole story. You get the bits that affect Chula's life and the things that Chula understands about the situation in Colombia at that time. So I thought that was handled really well. Um, but it revolves around her family, and they live in relative safety in this gated community, but the violence is escalating, and it's starting to impact everybody. I mean, they lose power, they have to go out and get like buckets of water to bathe with, and things are just kind of unraveling everywhere. um, and then the other part of the story is Patrona, who, and she lives with her mother who's ill, and all of these siblings, and she has to take care of them, so this is why she goes to work as this maid. And it's just her being like a victim of her circumstance, and her feeling stuck but trying to get out, and maybe following in league with people that she shouldn't, but she's offered money to do things, and she needs the money to take care of her family, and it's just like, and then their stories become intertwined because of some of the decisions that Patrona is having to make or feels she has to make. Yeah, could not put this book down, really enjoyed it. So the next book I'm going to talk about is The Book of Night Women by Marlon James. And I hesitate to talk about this book because I feel like I am in no way going to do it justice. I don't think I really have the words to describe how impactful this book was and how much I loved it. I mean, I gave it 5 stars. There's not a rating high enough, in my opinion, for this book. I initially picked it up simply because it was set pre 1900, and that was it. And I was like, okay, here's a historical fiction set before 1900. It was also about an event I didn't really know much about, so that was a plus. And yeah, so I really don't know how to describe this book. I don't want to do it disservice. So let's start with like the basic plot. This book is set in it starts in like the late 1700s and goes until like the early 1800s, and is set in Jamaica. So this is during slavery in Jamaica. I guess in its simplest terms, it's a coming of age story of this girl Lilith, who is a slave on a sugar plantation in Jamaica. But that is so not what this book is about. Like, yes, it's a coming of age story of the slave, and that's interesting in and of itself. But I will say, while this book I thought was amazing, it is not for the faint of heart. I mean, we know that slavery is going to be discussed in this book, but I wasn't prepared for what this book was going to be like. It's very raw and visceral and cruel, and it does not sugarcoat anything. So it centers around Lilith and these other slaves that kind of see something in her. I think they call it like sense like darkness in her, or this element to her personality, or to her being, that is going to help their cause. So these are the night women. They are a group of women who meet at night, and they are plotting a rebellion. And Lilith is reluctantly sucked into this group. So this particular period in Jamaica's history, the population of Black slaves was growing a lot. So Black slaves outnumbered the whites in Jamaica, something like, I think it was like 30 or 35 to 1. Plantation owners and overseers and slave drivers, they are intensely afraid of the Black slaves and like how many of them there are. And it's just complete unrest in Jamaica. There's violence everywhere all the time. There's constantly groups of slaves that are trying to revolt. Happening around the same time in Haiti is when the Black slaves in Haiti are able to successfully rebel and form this nation for themselves. And word has got back to the Black slaves in Jamaica, and they want the same for themselves. And it's just this really, tensions are really super high because of the dynamic of there being so many Black slaves and the white people fearing this. And so, I mean, not to say that slavery anywhere was ever pleasant, but things right now are particularly violent for slaves. The white owners and slave drivers are particularly cruel. And yeah, it was a very difficult read. Things were described that I can never unknow. But I do highly recommend this book. So that, I mean, that's the plot, but that's not even really what the story's about. There's this theme in the book of circles. Circles are brought up many, many times. So there's all these cycles. So the cycle of slavery where, the slaves, you're born in this horrible situation, you rebel, but it doesn't work, so you're back into slavery. Like, there's this cycle of slavery, literally walking in circles, laboring in fields, the cycle of the harvest. And walking in circles is a theme that comes up over and over again in this book. It's also about like loyalty and betrayal, and how hard it is to have loyalty when, like, how loyal can you be to someone when you have your survival to worry about. It's about like morality in a way too, and this, like, does morality even have a place when you're in this situation? There's a part in the book where Lilith is trying to find her badness. It's almost like it's good to have badness because she needs to be able to do bad things in order to help herself. It was just, I love it. I can't rave enough about it. And another thing I wanted to mention is how, the characters are so great. They're complex people. They're not just painted as, you're victims. Like, obviously they're victims, but they're many other things. Sometimes they are forgiving, sometimes they are vengeful, sometimes they are loyal to each other, sometimes they betray each other. He just wrote them beautifully. One other last thing I wanted to say about this book, if you decide to pick it up, which I hope you do, it's written in, I hesitate to say dialect, but like Jamaican, I think it's called patois, and it maybe took like a page or two for me to get into it. So it's really hard to understand at first, but as you read, you get used to it, and it's the first book I've read with really like strong dialect written out. But I really think the writing it in that fashion was in great service to the book. I don't think it would have felt the same. It just gave it an authenticity and a weight and realness. And I think that using that dialect, writing it in that dialect, really honors the people, like the real life people who would have lived through this period of time. Okay, so moving on to my last book. This is not going to take me long because this was actually a DNF, unfortunately. So this is a book that has been on my TBR since like high school. I heard about this book. So that's like, like 20 years ago for me almost. It is a super well-known historical fiction, and that's I, Claudius by Robert Graves. And I am shocked that I didn't finish this book and I did not like it. It's kind of like a fictional autobiography. So it's I, Claudius, because that's how the book starts. I, Claudius, blah, 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 blah. I could not force myself to read any more of this. I found it to be such a slog. I found it to be very dry and uninteresting, and it should have been interesting. So backtracking to actually what it's about. So Claudius is this emperor, and by all accounts, he never should have got to that station. Um, he had like a stutter. He was like termed like a weakling. I don't know if that means if maybe he was born premature, maybe he had an childhood illness or something. I'm not sure, but he was basically by his family termed this like weakling, like good for nothing, stuttering idiot essentially. And he rose to emperor, and like that coupled with fictional or like a fake autobiography like sounded so interesting. Like I feel like I would have had more fun reading a textbook about Claudius, honestly. Um and this book has high praise. It has like a 4 point something on Goodreads, and I just don't get it. I don't understand it. I found it so dull. And then my grandmother this, and she really didn't like this person, so she was manipulating her husband the emperor in this way so that this would happen. And I was like, I think I would have enjoyed it more if it wasn't written as an autobiography, even though that was one of the things that compelled me to pick up this book. Um, but if the narrative voice had been more like just following the the plot of what was happening, um, and all the things that led up to Claudius becoming emperor, rather than having Claudius like basically narrate his family history and rise to emperor, like I think that might have been more interesting. But everyone else on the planet seems to love this book. So I don't know. Give it a try and tell me what you think, if you agree with me or not. So yeah, those were the four books I tried to read. So the three books I actually finished for Historathon. So thanks so much for watching, and please comment your favorite historical fiction below. And I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye.